All right, guys, what is up? Welcome in. Happy Friday. Welcome to GC Live. Got a very special guest who's going to join us here momentarily. But first, let me tell you about our guy, Clinton Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintonHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. As we always tell you, if you're in the market for a home or that is something that maybe something you're interested in for the future, hit up our guy, Clint, and just let him sit down with you. He's going to walk you through every single step of what at times can be a daunting process. How do I get a mortgage? How much money do I need? How much money do I need to budget for? How much home can I afford? All these are questions you may have, and our guy Clint can walk you through the entire process as he did for me. Again, that number, 803-422-6797.
And we'll also tell you about our friends over at Ferry Chevrolet. That's Fairey Chevrolet, ferrychevrolet.com. Conveniently located in Orangeburg between Columbia and Charleston. They've been in business since 1926. Started in St. Matthews, still run by a fourth-generation dealer in Joseph Ferry. Make sure you go check them out. If you're in the market for a new or used vehicle, want to check out their financing options, want to check out their inventory, ferrychevrolet.com. Or you can give them a call, 803-937-4531. Always appreciate our friends over at Ferry Chevrolet.
All right, without further ado, let's go out to our special guest on today's show. Clark, appreciate you being patient, man, and waiting through our ad reads there. We first had you on, I think you were kind of just SEC StatCat at the time. Since then, you're with us as kind of a colleague on On3 as well, doing the impact ratings, man. I think it's been a while since we've had you on, so I appreciate you taking the time today and really excited to dive into some of these guys with you today, Clark.
Oh, I'm excited, Chris and Wes. Yeah, happy Friday. A lot has changed the last few years, but it's every day's a blessing. So yeah, I just, as you can tell by my, I guess, dynamicism, I love what we do, and I'm really itching to talk about some Gamecock football.
For sure, man. So let's dive into it. This portal class for South Carolina, I thought it was interesting. Not only like Jacarius Peak is kind of the headliner of this bunch. Not only was he one of the most highly ranked transfer portal guys across all the different recruiting services and rankings and all that, but I know you've already put out maybe the early version of your impact rankings for just every player in college. He is way up there on that list. South Carolina actually has quite a few guys, like I think 3 guys in that top 25. So let's just dive right into it, man. What about Jacarius Peak stands out to you when you have looked at what he kind of brings to the table on film?
Well, guys, I'm a child of the air raid, and I have an affinity for pass blockers. Your guy, Jacarius Peak, is one of the best returning pass blockers. So when you're looking at these types of things, of course, you have pressure rate allowed, very basic, but not every offense runs true drop back patterns. Some really rely on quick passes and screens and RPOs that, well, really anyone can hold up for about a second or two, right? But if you're holding back on those true pockets, well, NC State was one of the highest offenses utilizing true pass sets. And in those situations, flying colors. So while some might think he's a little on the small side and his run blocking is a little sloppy, absolutely, that is an area of improvement. He's still very athletic as well. According to numbers shared with Bruce Feldman that we've had behind the scenes shared with us, he runs a 4.8 40. He has a 4.3 shuttle. He has a 32.5-inch vert, and he's 6'4". So, like, he has the athleticism there. He has the traits there. So, and we know this South Carolina offense is so desperate to try and curb the pressure rate allowed. So he's immensely impactful, and I think he's got the goods to really be one of the best tackles in college football this fall.
Clark, I got a general question for you. First of all, I want to give you a shout out. You have, I don't know if you coined this term, but in your rankings here of the top, way too early top 100 college football players that Wes just referenced there, you mentioned Dylan Stewart and the term that I love, Havoc Goblin. That is about as good as it gets. Did you coin that, or did you? It's okay to say you stole. All good things are stolen at some point,
Yeah, it's a little bit of an amalgam. Of course, you've heard defensive linemen before called goblins, monsters, what have you.
Yes.
But Havoc, of course, has been more of these modern metrics that, of course, people like me are trying to get more into the common vernacular, getting common fans to know what they are. So basically, Havoc plays are anything negative that can potentially happen for an offense. So these are pressures allowed, tackles for losses allowed, fumbles, interceptable passes, stuff like that. So the Texas A&M game, of course, he just took the first half over by himself. Like, that is what I am talking about. When he is on his A game, when his launch and his determination aligns with, his motor, no one can block him, and he can change games by himself. So a lot of the returning top pass rushers are like, they're like 6'3", 6'4", not unlike Bain and Bailey in the NFL draft right now. A lot of people are like a little hesitant on taking them that high because they don't have premier length. That is not the problem with Dylan Stewart. He's 6'6", 250. He's got that frame, and he has all the tools you want to basically build a defensive lineman from scratch. So while, the production has been a little bit inconsistent, Colin Stewart has been more productive. He has been more quote unquote impactful on a per snap basis as an underclassman. But in terms of upside, it's really hard to, be a dissenter looking at what Dylan Stewart can offer.
And one more general one. I just had a couple of housekeeping things. I was like, I got to make sure I ask this. So another thing that you do for On3 that you're really involved with is the transfer portal rankings, right? And so
Yes.
Wes and I were talking about this the other day. It's already hard to rank high school kids for obvious reasons. And we had Charles Power on. He recently, last show, he always gives us great stuff on that. How do you go about ranking transfer portal kids? Like, what are the most important? Is it at that point much more about production? Then you've got different levels of production against different levels of competition. Like, what kind of goes into that process generally for you?
Well, a lot, to say the least. But, for these kids who have very little college production, because I am like our lead college scout, I generally have to defer to Charles and Cody Bellinger and to see what they thought of these guys initially coming out, because I don't have tape to go on. I don't have data to go on. It's not like these schools are going to share the practice tape with me so I can, get these behind the scenes, how they've been, privately. So it's a lot of different factors involved. Of course, I love returning production in the Power Four. That matters. But you got to be statistically pleasing to me, and you got to have traits that translate. So my little mantra here is traits that translate, metrics that matter. So we already talked about Dylan Stewart, his traits that will translate, and the metrics that matter for me, of course, if you're like a defensive lineman, how impactful you on a per snap basis. Are you doing havocs? Are you getting stops? Are you impacting the quarterback? Are you making his job harder? Are you consistently tackling, not just, giving offenses breakaway opportunities? If you're a defensive back, are you very stingy with the ball? Are you more zone? So there's a lot of different styles. Of course, if you're looking for a pure X receiver, you might rank guys a little bit differently, but I try to go on pure impact. And that's a lot, like I mentioned, some statistically driven things, but also if you're 5'7", 160, the odds of you panning out as a dynamic power four receiver are low. And I'm going to dunk on myself here because that is exactly what Danny Scudero did, who was at San Jose State, transferring to Colorado, and what DeJesus, God, what's his first name? Jacob DeJesus, who was JKS's lead receiver at California this past season. So he was 5'7", 160. He was like nearly a 1,000-yard receiver. So there's no true formula for it. The eye test, of course, goes a long way, but same time, if you see somebody who has everything you want, and like, not to dunk on him, but Patrick Payton was a perfect example of this last year, where he's a former four-star type of guy. He's been around these blue chip type of programs, very sought after, ends up going to LSU, but I'm lower on him because I'm looking at his profile, and he just was a kind of below average power four starter. And if you're a below average power four starter, the odds that you're just all of a sudden the lights are going to come on, your fifth year in college football, aren't so great. So yeah, you kind of look at upside, how much years they have left, how much they've already produced, and just all this random things that can go wrong. Because like even like the strongest, like for people who do regression analysis at home, so like these are like, it's an economic theory, but it's kind of slightly creeping into what we do for analysis purposes. But a good model generally can tell you if things are good or bad based on R squared. If it's 0.5, that basically will describe half your data set. A good one for football is like in the low 30s. So like, even though like, oh, we can see a trend here, that's still like 2/3 of these variables are just completely random and just cannot be predicted. I mean, look at Indiana the last 2 years. They've been able to win in the margins by finding things that people have not been able to compute because there's just so many unknowns, so many things that you just cannot contextualize. Same time, you don't want to become Robert McNamara in Vietnam. You don't want to just have like these boxes to check, just to check boxes, right? You've got to make sure that these things actually translate. So that's why I'm talking like these impact plays. They're more sticky as opposed to like volume production, like just total yards and yards per attempt. Those things are very volatile as is. So just really trying to, doing what I have done in the SEC, charting every snap, knowing how teams function and how yards can come easily and all that type of stuff. I know I'm rambling because I know you opened a can of worms here, Chris. Asking for the methodology, because like it isn't just like, okay, he had 1,000 yards, blah blah. It's not that simple. So like there's a lot of little different things that go into it, to say the least.
That's why you have me on. Yeah,
I love the passion. By the way, Clark, I'm just going to be completely honest. Chris and I both were like, we don't really have to do any prep for this show. We're just going to turn Clark loose. So ramble all you want. Just to be completely honest, we've had you on before. We're here for it. So don't apologize. We are here for it. And I want to turn Chris. I'm going to turn him loose on a different subject that I know he's going to have some information for.
Yeah.
It's already. I feel like it's a conversation a lot of people around here have very different opinions on. Lenoris Sellers' second season at the helm. Mm-hmm. How much of like, if you squint, there was still some like, ooh, that was a huge improvement. But then how much of what happened with the not as much productivity are you saying, man, he's just had to deal with so much around him versus truly this part of his game was a true regression? Like when you really dove into it, what is your take on Sellers last year? And then let's separate that. I want to get into Briles and what it could mean in the future, maybe in a second here, but just let's stay with last year for now.
Concisely, he played on Heisman level difficulty last year. So I'm in the middle of my quarterback impact study where I'm charting all the top returning quarterbacks against their most difficult opponents. So most of these guys so far in a 6 or 7 game sample play, 4-3 top 35 defenses. He played 8 last year. And that's ignoring the fact that his offensive line was doo-doo. So if you people at home were unaware, South Carolina, again, finished dead last in the SEC in pressure rate allowed. It was near 40%. Of course, that precipitated in for the 5th time in 6 seasons representing the SEC's floor and negative play rate. So those are things that are just really hard to overcome, particularly when he wasn't really put in positions to do what he does well a whole lot. So in my opinion, his best self is when he's outside the pocket, of course, off of play action on bootlegs or RPOs. You guys do kind of a slide wheelie RPO, though it's in vogue right now. And I would suspect with Kendal Briles that a lot of the flats and slide stuff will remain because he did that stuff at not only Arkansas with KJ Jefferson, but he also did it with Josh Hoover, a much different quarterback. So it's in his veins. It's in his DNA. This is going to be more orchestrated completions for him. So he just has, even though he has pretty good prototypical size, 6'3", he's got the good frame, he's just never really been comfortable seeing the field, anticipating things, particularly over the middle. Outside the numbers, different story. You can see a one-on-one, you can throw jump balls, go balls all day long, but it's the stuff over the middle, particularly when he has to drop his eyes initially, readjust, and then rediscover somebody downfield, far less ineffective. And that's been a far a fairly big shortcoming in his game. So yes, you mentioned you can squint, you can still see things that pop statistically on paper. Yeah, there's really not so much you can provide solace there, but against the traits that translate, just playing on such a hard level of difficulty and erasing these negatives. Can you imagine if it was a quarterback, maybe like a Ty Simpson or just like a statue back there who had no creativity bone in his body and just consistently took sacks? Yikes. So he is a fairly good eraser, even though there is a big problem about taking sacks, and eating sacks, not seeing the field well, not making timely decisions. But I think Kendal Briles will be an immensely nice ambassador in that regard, helping him find anticipation, trust, having his brother emerge in the middle to the late half of the season. I do not think it was an accident. Of course, obviously you want to get him involved to, off the field reasons. If he's, looking to potentially transfer, give him an incentive to stay. But they have a clear chemistry, a clear trust there. I know where he's going to be on a certain drop in my rhythm, and that's not worth nothing. So even though there's going to be a little bit a new offensive tweak, a little bit new offensive voice there, that year-over-year continuity is very huge. And when you have someone like Nick Harbor and you have someone like Kendal Briles who had used Treylon Burks in a very similar fashion, maybe this is finally the year that his potency can unlock everything, because this is what the offense has had to be. When you're moving backwards so much, it's not an accident as well. When you're last in rush yards before contact, you're last in overall offensive success rate. Yuck. But you're fairly average in explosive plays. If you can just fix that down-to-down consistency with more of these orchestrated completions while maintaining that potency, I think the overall product's going to be a lot better moving forward.
Clark, let's dive into Kendal Briles a little bit more, kind of bouncing off of what you just said. He's had very different quarterbacks, kind of very different approaches based on where he was at. Some of that maybe is based on what the head coach at the time wanted out of him, what the skill set of that quarterback was. What do you suspect Gamecock fans are going to see schematically from Briles with this group? And then what are maybe some parts of Lenoris's game that you feel like will translate, or that he will be able to enhance under Briles?
So I think it's just Briles will help him be more decisive, get the ball out of your hands faster. Of course, that has been some of the elements that Shula tried, but of course, again, the down-to-down consistency was not there. So I think Briles will be able to help in that regard. And if you can just be an average down-to-down offense, so that's like a success rate around 43, 45%, much better than when you're in the 30s, which is sadly been the case last few years. So again, it's just being able to see pre-snap tells, being able to recognize post-snap rotations, and just ball out. So that comes with timing. That comes with reps. Of course, we're entering his third year as a starter. Hopefully it finally all clicks with a better proven quarterback whisperer, for lack of a better term, in his ear. So I do think that in terms of like the plays, they're basically going to be not the same, but there's going to be a lot of similarities. I think formationally, there's going to be some changes. So more empty quad bunch stuff, screen pass options where you'll have if they don't match your numbers to one side of the formation, it's just an easy throw, pre-snap position, you don't have to do any thinking. Likewise, if they don't overload, you have a one-on-one matchup on a slant or a fade or a hitch or something on the backside. So very orchestrated things, simple things, and when the defense starts to peak up, and then that's when you can use Lenore Seller's arm, because that's one of the things he does well. He's got a very natural, effortless downfield zip. You can't teach that stuff. Again, I'm going through my quarterback impact study. Not all of these guys throw the same. Some guys need a little extra beat to get some oomph on the ball. That is not his problem. So I just think his biggest thing is a little bit more cerebral processing, and that just comes with reps, and that comes with a little bit more coaching that he's going to get.
Well, Clark, let's sticking with Briles and maybe some of the differences between him and Shula. I think we naturally, because of Lenore Sellers, we gravitate towards the pass game, right? Mm-hmm. What can you do, whether it's formationally, calls, just how you're coaching it day to day to get him back to that level he was at in 2024, right? And then beyond that. But I want to talk run game too.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier South Carolina's run game has been, with the exception of the 2024 season when you had Rocket Sanders, Sellers back there in the backfield. South Carolina has been towards the bottom or at the bottom rushing. And that was the case again last year. So look, we know some of the changes, right? Personnel on the offensive line, new scheme, new offensive line coach, running back room has undergone some changes. We know all that. Schematically, what do you see as the biggest differences with what Kendal Briles wants to do and then versus what Mike Shula did? And how could that potentially lead to more success for South Carolina this year?
Well, in my opinion, like Briles has basically been a very good coach at matching what his guys are good at and just hammering it. So when he was at Arkansas, it was very much outside zone focused and a lot more diverse when he was at TCU and basically just trying to throw stuff at a wall because, his run games were fairly inconsistent the last couple of years. But the real thing, I think secret sauce is getting a tackle breaker at running back, a negator, someone who can just work through mess all the time. And frankly, that's just a skill set that's kind of dwindling in volume. So I love rushing stable metrics. So that's broken tackle rate, yards after contact, these types of things that no matter what type of blocking you get, I can depend you doing that, adding that extra value. And it's one of the reasons why I really liked Faison last year, even though, his offseason was a little, atypical. He was fighting for eligibility. I don't know how much he was actually with the team, but I don't think he ever found his groove as one of the best tackle breakers because obviously leveling up from the G5 to the P4, you're going to have an increased degree of difficulty, but he was still an elite tackle breaker in the G5. I thought he would be an immensely helpful person. That didn't come out in the wash because that's what Raheem Sanders, even though he was coming off an injury, we didn't know exactly how impactful he would be. Well, this is a 2-year-old stat, so bear with me, but he and Sellers that year had combined for like 60 broken tackles when hit behind the line of scrimmage. I don't think any other person in the SEC had more than 10. That's off the top of my head. It's something like that. It's something just ridiculous where these guys, if they weren't there, the product would be even worse. So when you're bringing in 5 new guys up front, again, even though the transfer portal is relatively young, there haven't been many success stories bringing in 5 new guys from 5 different schemes and just matching them all together. So this spring's going to be huge for Kendal Briles to find out what these guys are good at. And like I mentioned, he's one of the best at maximizing, hammering, avoiding what they do bad, and just running what he trusts they can execute. But having a tackle breaker, it'll make the whole thing a lot better. So Matt Fuller, if you can step up and be that guy, because at points last season, of course, he started to be the primary guy, that it can be an immensely helpful thing and it would take gravity or eyeballs off of Lenore Sellers if you wanted to get him, of course, more involved in the run game, because Josh Hoover, not that type of, he's more of a Drew Brees type of guy, not one of these guys you get involved in the quarterback run game unless it's like a quarterback drawing against the light box and whatever. But, KJ Jefferson, he was a quarterback counter, power type of guy. And of course, even though it has been sporadic, Lenore Sellers has been an effective design runner in that regard. So anything you can do to take eyeballs off of him, I think it does start with having an immensely or just a consistent tackle breaker at running back to take heat off of him and help negate these negatives that are just completely drive killers.
Clark, let's talk a little bit about another guy who there's been a conversation around him since he arrived at South Carolina. That would be Nick Harbor. And just kind of, early on, I think expectations from maybe just casual fans were all out of whack. They saw the 5 stars by his name. And then you kind of dive in, you're like, this guy truly is an athlete trying to learn to play wide receiver. Yeah. I thought the kid has obviously worked incredibly hard to bring along some of those like more nuanced things that go to actually playing wide receiver. What did you see from Nick this past season? What do you think is maybe like the next level, I guess, for him?
Yeah, the next level is expanding the route tree. So as I kind of hinted earlier, it's fairly vertical, a lot of streaks and posts and curls and stuff like that. So just getting a little more diversity there. Obviously the major skill set, a lot of people want to think receiver, well, it has to be catching. It's in the name. No, it's getting open. That is the skill set. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a super awesome track star, Usain Bolt. If they jam you at the line of scrimmage, you can't get around them. You're boot. So he does have the frame we mentioned. Of course, I was one of those people who hyped him up and just saw stars when he, committed to South Carolina, because he is of that Calvin Johnson mold on paper. And of course, I think of any position, I think wide receiver, everyone is immensely optimistic. Even quarterbacks, pass rush. I think wide receiver is just that position where everyone's just yeah, he's the next super guy. And I don't know why that is, but again, when you check all those boxes on paper, you just consistently have to be more of a go-to for your offense. So while he was obviously impactful on these Yankee shot type of plays, so stuff like this, where he's this deep post man and he can get basically, if the safety bites off a play action, you throw over top of his head, or if he bites on one of these crosses, you can throw over top of his head. Very effective at that. Of course, that's, straight line speed against a zone coverage or an out leverage man guy. So just being a little bit more diverse, more consistent in how you can provide avenues for this offense, because again, that opens up things for your play callers. Okay, I know I only can use him in X ways. That means I can only do basic vertical passing type of things. But if I can use him on drags, if I can use him stuff over the middle, that really does open up, like I mentioned the term gravity earlier, that can really open up things for Jaden Sellers and potentially some of these tight ends and backs, because that has also been a consistent effort for Briles to spread the wealth around. He doesn't really like to have a volume offense. He likes to spread the wealth around, like any good play caller. He wants to keep a balanced script and keep the defense guessing. So in terms of that, if the defense just knows they can play their backs on their heels, he's far less ineffective. But if he can do a little bit more of that and open up some yak opportunities, running to the space of the defense, the voids of the defense over the middle, I really do think it will help his overall upside, because we know he can take the top off the defense. It's what else can you do? You know what I mean? So elite athlete, we just need to see a little bit more down-to-down consistency, and I think that starts with his versatility and his offerings and how he's utilized within the offense.
Clark, let's go back to the transfer portal class again, with your involvement with that whole process of trying to slot guys the best you can for On3 and the impact that they're going to try to make. South Carolina obviously bringing in pretty big class, overhaul in the offensive line, but they also added some key defensive pieces. Tell us a little bit of your thoughts on Quaysheed Scott, DB out of Kentucky.
Yes.
And then also want to get your thoughts on Caleb Herring, very intriguing edge out of Tennessee, who's shown some flashes, but hasn't quite, hit how you think the former #1 player in the state of Tennessee should have so far.
I'm really shocked the new Kentucky staff did not fight and scream to keep Scott. So he basically only had one bad game. Trey Richardson at Vanderbilt basically beat him on 3 or 4 deep balls along the left sideline. And that was basically his only blemishes the entire season. He really did blossom as one of their more consistent back enders this past season. Of course, I know he's from the state of South Carolina. Easy draw to come back home, especially if you're going to get paid. So I think he's one of these people that can be an instant impact type of guys. Of course, South Carolina's secondary has had a lot of good dudes lately, and I think he's the latest good one there. So Caleb Herring, he didn't grade particularly well. And of course, that's always a concern when you're bringing in a new asset. But lengthwise, I think he can be at least another option, again, to take some attention off of Dylan Stewart, where Dylan Stewart says not every single time facing double and triple teams, that maybe once in a while he can get a one-on-one, and that's where he can just really go and be a havoc goblin. But let's also not forget the 2 defensive tackles they're bringing in as well, because when Dylan Stewart was at his best, when he was at his freshman season, of course, he had Kyle Kennard, but you also had Tonkin Hemingway, and bless my heart,
PJ Sanders.
And yes, I mean, you had a complete defensive front. So you're going to have a fairly good complete defensive front again. And because Tamiwa Joyaway, forgive me if I butchered that last name, but again, this is a former Kentucky commit as well. He was coming from Illinois, but a power 4 guy through and through. This is not a guy that's coming from the G5. You know what you're getting from him last year. He had a very good impact rate this past season as a kind of part-time starter, volume reserve. And I really do think with what is asked of him, I think everyone reaches their potential. I think that's going to be one of the sneakier good defensive fronts in the SEC. So, again, with the offensive line, we're bringing in 5 new guys, but the defensive front, it's not the same case. Of course, you're just more in attack mode. You're already thinking about your individual matchups as opposed to being a cohesive unit like the offensive line. So even though they are freshly new faces, it's a completely different situation. I think that is a very good group that that Beamer was able to put together.
Clark, is there anybody on the roster that it's not in the top 100 right now in terms of your impact rankings? Putting you on the spot here a little bit, but that maybe can turn the dial. They got a couple of linebackers that are high upside coming back. Justin Okoronkwo, J.R. Johnson. I don't know if they have a shot to take that leap. Bakari Swain obviously did a ton in the punt return game. Will probably take on an even bigger role at corner. Those are maybe some of the higher upside guys that pop to me a little bit.
I mean, Swain's the guy. Of course, he started this season so incendiary with those punt returns, right? Like, so instant, like, who is this guy? So if he can continue doing that, increase with a defensive role, he has a very good shot. Forgive my language. He has a very good shot to make the top 75 corners back list. Because like I already mentioned, this staff is fairly good at finding dudes back there. They're fairly good at getting athletes back there and just really having a very consistently dependable individual effort there. So I would bet on Swain to be that guy at this point in time.
Yeah, I really like Swain, and I think you make a good point real quick before I throw another question at you. Swain, I think, kind of had his breakout game as a DB against Bama. They had really good receiving core. He made some great plays down the stretch there, I think, against Bama. Look at what Torian Gray's done. He's pumped guys out. Brandon Cisse, right? From NC State last year.
Yeah.
Hey, it's funny.
Like he might be a first-round pick if he tests well. Of course, basically after pick 26, it's all like subjective at that point. It's not as like we're basically taking what we feel more comfortable with, and athleticism, traits that translate. Obviously, those are the bankable things. And not to brag, but On3 had him higher than 247 and ESPN in the transfer portal last year. So that's always fun. But consistently good effort.
And to your point, you brought up Trey Richardson against Quay Scott last year. Trey Richardson made a lot of DBs look silly last year. I remember, Trey ran past Cisse a couple times, in the Vanderbilt, South Carolina game. So he's obviously a heck of a player. Where's he going this year?
Louisville. And I know Louisville is super stoked to have him. I
bet they are. I bet they are.
More like behind the scenes, because I kind of have to have the end of the year impact rankings match the initial transfer portal rankings because they're all one profile. So once the year flips, I can then boost people. So I had to keep Trey Richardson at an 89, which is like a high 3-star ranking. And the Louisville folks, the GMs, they were yelling at Pete Nakos, why the is he not a 4-star? I'm like, it's a clerical thing. Just wait 3 days, I promise. But he's a legitimate vertical type of guy. And of course, Jeff Brom, his offense is playing with 3 different styles of quarterbacks and soon to be a 4th. He's bound to be one of the more, I think, voluminous ACC receivers this year. So kind of curious why Vanderbilt didn't let him go, because it seems like they have NFL buku bucks or NIL buku bucks of late, and they're willing to invest in anybody they feel who sees fit. So I'm kind of surprised to let him go, but he's a legitimate vertical type of option. I think a very underrated portal option.
So speaking of vertical options and a make you miss guy, let's talk a little bit about another really intriguing guy, Nitro Tuggle. Big traits guy, right? Played as a true freshman at Georgia. Caught some balls at Purdue last year. You turn on the tape, you can kind of see all right, this guy can really move. Maybe not the consistency that you want, but what do you think of Nitro and his next steps?
I was a little worried about him because, like you mentioned, the volume, the efficiency sucked. And so while you do have that blue chip pedigree there and you do see some pop, receiver is such a deep position to where I have very little patience on somebody now. I just quick and move on. Nick Anderson's another type of person. Okay, he had 1,000-yard receivers, redshirt freshman. Not so much the last 2 seasons. I'm over it. Like the odds that these guys have true bounce back years, there's very few examples, and they're very hard to come to find. So like when they have these rough starts and when they're already like kind of meh on paper, it's just really hard for me to get too excited because the position's just so freaking deep, and every single year someone just comes out of nowhere and just excites. I mean, think of Charlie Becker. Who knew of Charlie Becker this time last year? And of course, he was the downfield go-to guy for the national champion. It's coming out of Nashville, 6'4" white guy. I mean, come on, who saw that coming? So like, there's always just the flavor of the month that I'm more excited and quite frankly, they've just been more of a sustaining factor. Very few people have just been able to come back from slow starts and been able to be draftable, bona fide, like top 50 options at the position.
Clark, speaking of possibly butchering names, Chris, you're gonna have to help me, man. Our guy Boubet, I always screw
It's
it
just
up.
Boubet. It's Boubet. Yeah. I can make another run of it if I
Make a
get
run
it
at
back.
it, Chris. Let's just try.
Yeah, if I can get it back in front of me, it's Ababu
State
DK Nagubu.
Yeah.
Yes.
On3 has him as an 88, which is actually a good bit higher than 24/7 Sports. So I gotta imagine, Clark, something popped there with you off the page. What can you tell us about what went into that rating a little bit?
Well, I can't speak for them because they have people who are going to be starters ranked as 85s. And for me, an 85 is like someone who should just be a backup, like not see the field. Like 86s are kind of like volume reserves, bad starters. 87s are like pretty people who you probably shouldn't be wanting to start or slightly below average starters. 88s are bang average, fairly good, dependable power 4 starters. And I think that's what you're getting because he's a pretty good run blocker. He brings his hips with him fairly well. And even though, he is coming from a lower level, it's not unlike Missouri State did not level up. They were a G5 team last year. They were not an FCS team last year. So he's already got the hard part over, and he graded in the 80s in run blocking. So very good. We already mentioned South Carolina, dead last in rush yards before contact this past season. Getting someone like this should be a positive asset moving forward. So I'm not expecting him to light the world on fire or anything. I mean, he is outside the top 500 in our transfer portal rankings, but relatively, I think he's got a lot more to offer than a lot of these other guys that are in the portal. And I think, I think he has 1 or 2 more years. I think he might even be, because of his skill set, he might be kicked inside to guard. We'll see. But, he might always be a swing tackle type of option. But I just really like what he offers South Carolina's run game because he's a mauler.
Clark, I'm going to go in general again, and I apologize for, jumping around portal and then, Carolina's current roster and scheme talk. But, just forgive me. We're jumping all around here.
No, it's fine.
So let's look at the rest of the SEC, right? Once again, South Carolina's going to have one of the most difficult schedules in the country. They got their now 9-game SEC slate, then Clemson, a couple other non-con sprinkled in there. Very tough schedule and a very important year. But when you look at just roster construction and then when you think about scheme and coaching, who are some teams, maybe a team or two where you're like, feel like people should be talking about this team a little bit more this year because of what they've done on the coaching and personnel front? And then are there a couple out there that you're like, I don't really see it as much maybe as some of the others? Anybody come to mind?
Well, obviously respect to Vanderbilt. Basically borrowing New Mexico State's offensive staff and running that scheme. And of course, Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers, of course, that stuff matters, but like, it's really hard to find a unique approach to the game like that in today's game. There's a lot of copycat stuff, a lot of homogeny, a lot of people running the same kind of patterns, like you can see behind me. Even though certain things are growing in popularity, everyone's stealing it from each other. So very few people operate the way Vanderbilt does, which is a split zone, orbit heavy, option offense. And of course it has quarterback design runs. It has shot plays. It has bootlegs, very tough to defend. Of course, they're very unique in how they do their offensive line. Of course, they have that strong side and the weak side, and they flip them based on the formational strength and what they want to do with the defensive front. So that's really in a class of its own. I do like even though it does give me some gray hairs in terms of the charting process, Jeff Levy does some pretty wacky stuff down there in Mississippi State. Kind of dummy patterns, kind of sometimes 1-2-man routes, but very creative because it's not like he inherited a stacked roster. But I mean, even this past season, they had like 3 or 4 games that they just barely let go, and they could have had an even better season, beating their win total. So even though, it is a super spread, veer and shoot esque offense like Tennessee, the creativity, the uniqueness, the singularity with how they run the ball sometimes really is top of mind now. But in terms of like, I love what Georgia does in terms of packaging plays. They have a very good fake screen package. I very much like the fact that Sark has a lot of deep depth, breadth playbooks every single week. He's a very motiony type of offense, orbit, eye candy type of stuff, opens up a lot of deception activity. But in terms of like, making the most of what you have for lower level, or I wouldn't say just not the blue blood programs you would expect, absolutely Vanderbilt and Mississippi State have come to mind the last 2 years.
Clark, I think last thing I got for you, man, what would have to happen for South Carolina, in your opinion, to erase last year and kind of flip that on its head a little bit, be, a few games over 500 as opposed to below it, and just get more in line in terms of how they competed in the league the prior year as opposed to last year? Like, you have the perspective of seeing all the teams from an eye, whereas we get very hyper-focused here. Sure. What can you tell? What would have to happen, you think, man?
Well, obviously, I think you can't be the worst offensive line in the conference. It starts with that. You cannot have a double-digit negative play rate for the 7th straight year. You can't do it and expect to make the playoffs. You can't do it. I'm sorry. So you got to at least get that unit to be average. And I think it has the capability to be at least average. If they're at least average, and that is, a half second more on average, that Lenore Sellers can keep his eye ups and develop his timing and anticipation and his trust with his receiving core, the end product's going to be all the better. And again, if that cushion's just a little bit better up front, it was 1.6 yards on average this past season. It was almost a third of a yard lower than the next team, Alabama. So again, class of their own. If you can get that up to like 1.92, maybe not even average, but just, not outside the bottom 5, where you can at least give your new running backs and Matt Fuller a little bit more cushion, where he can build up some momentum, some steam, where he can be a more effective tackle breaker. Because like I mentioned, if defenses are going to play 2 deep shells, there's a growing fad across the league. And if they're still going to be able to stifle explosive runs, which has been a trend within this league, no matter if you're a quarterback, receiver run, or a running back run, for 5 straight years. It's been down, down, down. So if they're going to play back and they're going to give you light boxes, do yourself a favor and break those tackles. So those are very obtainable things. And defensively, just create some more turnovers for yourself. Win the explosive play battle. That's been the MO for a lot of teams. So, again, like I mentioned, keep everything in front of you, tackle, contain, and make them drive the length of the field, because it's really hard to do 12-play series, game in, game out, quarter in, quarter out. So I think having these ball hawks, like I mentioned, with Scott, will really be an immensely helpful thing for that pass rush to get home, which is, the old studies have been, would you rather have pass rush or secondary? Well, pass rush is more consistent, but secondary is more volatile, and more short-term impactful. So if they can control some more takeaways, Lenore Sellers, even though he has a little bit of a fumble problem, I think with better protection and, again, improved offensive line play, that's a very easy step to have obtainable results. Because if you can get to 9-10 wins, I think this is going to be with the talent they have at the impact positions. Like you guys kind of hinted, yeah, they have 3 impact 5-stars. Those are people who we think are going to be future first-round picks. We don't give those out like candy. Like, we really do a hard time to picking who we want to give 5-star status to. So you have those stars. It's just, can the rest of that roster, can they at least come out of that below average and closer to that above average range, and give yourself a little bit more margin of error that way. So I think that's the tools are there. The blueprint is there. It's not like you're asking guys to go from worst to first. Just go from worst to average in a number of spots, because some other guys, they have the playmakers that can obviously change ball games.
Clark, great insight as always, man. We appreciate you taking the time on a Friday, and love the passion, dude. Love the insight, the background, the context, all of it. So we'll let you maybe start the weekend here, man. But as always, appreciate you taking the time, okay?
Absolutely, Chris and Wes, and thank you for letting me get a lot of stuff on my chest. As you know, I can be loquacious. Hope you all, I didn't put anybody to sleep, as they're supposed to drive home here on a Friday afternoon. But pleasure as always, and hope you all have a great weekend and a very happy spring.
Awesome, man. That is Clark Brooks, now working with us there at On3. Also, of course, check out everything he's doing at SEC StatCat. Chris, we originally found Clark on the SEC StatCat side. Had him on the show and said, this guy is as passionate about this stuff probably as anybody out there. So I'm sure that came through if you're watching or listening to him there. Good stuff as always. Do we have another sponsor we need to hit here, Chris?
Yeah, let's tell everybody about a brand new sponsor here on the show. So our friends over at ATSCO, for saying, what is ATSCO? I've not heard of that. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. They've been around for a really long time. ATSCO has the latest and the greatest in hunting, waterproofing, personal care, and animal care products. They've got UV control, odor control. If you're a hunter, they've got specialized detergents that help you, remove all the scents, help you stay hidden. They've got waterproofing stuff, footwear, clothing, outdoor gear, personal care, again, skin protection, odor control, hair and body, sun protection, sensitive skin products, can even help you take care of your pets with their care techs and pet care products. Just go check them out. It's atsco.com. That's ATSKO, atsco.com. Our guy Lee running the show over there, do an outstanding job. Products loved by really folks that are in the outdoors. If you're an outdoorsman, definitely got to check out ATSCO. Go check them out, see what they've got to offer. And if you got a chance, let them know that you heard about them here on GC Live.
Of course, welcome to those guys. And thank you to all of our awesome sponsors here on both the podcast, the live show, and of course on GamecockCentral.com as well. Chris, before we get out of here, man, let's talk a bit about South Carolina's, I guess we would say, impending special teams hire as of this morning. Not quite finalized, but was headed that direction, expected to get done. That with former longtime Buffalo Bills coach Matthew Smiley, spent 3 years as their true special teams coordinator. Before that, was kind of an assistant in the special teams realm. Also has spent some time in college, and from what we understand, that factor was kind of important to Shane Beamer as well, that you're not just getting a NFL background guy. There's the background on both sides of this thing. Got to imagine, man, not the best time to have to hire somebody, frankly. Not the easiest time to have to hire somebody. We'll kind of see what stamp he puts on these special teams. I don't feel like we maybe know quite as much about him as we did, for example, like a Joe D when he was hired and you were looking at the resume there. But certainly someone that has done this in the league, has done this at the highest level, and has that resume to speak towards.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because you're right. It's not a Joe D where he, there is a little bit of a similarity in that Joe D was an NFL guy for 30 years, was actually in the college game helping Texas out. Similarly, Matthew Smiley was with the Bills, and then last year spent 2025 season helping out Penn State. And of course, there's another connection because South Carolina has two assistants in Deion Barnes and Stan Drayton that were both on staff with the Nittany Lions last year. So surely that was a helpful connection in terms of just learning more about him. But Smiley is a guy that started his career at Dartmouth as an assistant. So he has a lot of, first part of his coaching career. If you look at his trajectory, it was all college. Then he got into the NFL game, I think in 2013, been in the NFL for the most part since then, with the exception of last year. Coached at Charleston Southern West, so he's at least a little bit familiar with the Palmetto State. And you're right, maybe not as much information out there about him, like schematically. We know Shane Beamer going to be heavily involved with special teams, right? But we also know how important this role is for him. He's not a guy that said, I will just let an analyst coach it, or we'll just split it up. He's always been, yes, heavily involved himself, but he's always put a premium on experience and been very thoughtful about who he hires for this role. So I think it's a very interesting hire that we still have a lot to learn about once it actually becomes official. And will be interesting to see what kind of stamp he puts on it. South Carolina in a different position this year, Wes, because yes, they have some new faces on special teams, brought in a transfer kicker to compete, brought in a transfer long snapper to compete. But now they have a lot more guys back than they did last year. But you and I sat down with Shane Beamer recently, and he was very candid about some of the things that he wants to improve on special teams. And this is, before Smiley was hired, just like, here's some things we have to accomplish. So looks like he'll be the next guy that is going to be helping South Carolina actually try to accomplish those things.
Yeah, so we'll see what that looks like. To your point, last year they had to replace like everybody in the key special team spots. This year they won't have to. Frankly, a little bit of a, I guess, up and down time with the Bills for him, but also you're talking about doing it in the most competitive league in the world. So I think if you are coaching the NFL for that long as he was, you obviously know the game, you obviously know ball. And to your point, man, Beamer, I think, will be heavily involved in the special team side of things as well, as he kind of always is, I think. So, but you get Vicari back, you get Nick Harbor back, you get Mason Love back. There will be a kicker battle. You have Max Kelly. I think Upton Belafont will probably be fighting it out for that starting kicking role. But, otherwise you do bring back some guys that, have not only played, but have played pretty freaking well for you. So, but I do think, you got to circle that, man. That's an area where, and, people had differing opinions about Joe D as well. Pete Limbo set a standard that was going to be tough for anybody to meet, I think. ESPN efficiency for special teams for South Carolina last year had the Gamecocks 7th in the country. So, I mean, there are differing opinions about how accurate that is, but I think special teams, dude, is kind of fascinating to me because it's so many different things that are involved, right? Like, you may be great in all these other facets, but if your kicker struggles, the kicker wasn't very good. If you don't have many big splash returns, well, they didn't return the ball very well. Well, did you cover kicks well? Did you know what I'm saying? Like it's really, we group it together, but it's really, you have your kickoff return, your punt return, you have your kickoff coverage, your punt coverage. You have now, even within those teams, you have, am I trying to return this punt? Am I trying to block this punt?
Yep.
It's not just one unit, really.
Yeah, it's not. And, I thinking back to last year, so two things come to mind. And one is Joe D going into the last offseason said, we are going to be better in the return game. Like he was bound and determined, like it is going to happen. And really they were, and now you might say, well, it's just because they had Vicari Swain. Okay. Like
I'll push back on that too, though.
Yes. Yes. And I know
blocking on those punt
excellent
returns.
Blocking. Did, Vicari's big touchdown against Virginia Tech. Watch the blocking. Watch how the guys don't just go lay somebody out from the blind side. Watch Vicari's decision making. Yeah, you credit him for that, but it's obviously well coached what he can do. They were better. And so that box was checked. Mason Love, really good first year as a punter, right? Now, there were some other things that weren't as consistent. Those are the things that Beamer tended to talk to us about. One thing that he brought up to us is how they chart everything on Sundays after the games. He felt like they were where they needed to be and really good in the first half of the season. He felt like they were not where they needed to be in the back half. And you know how you can tell, Wes, when a coach is still thinking about a play? Like he brought up the example in the Clemson game, roughing the punter, And one of the most common things Beamer says is he'll go back to a special teams play and said that should have been a kick return for a touchdown, punt, should have been a block punt. He went back to that. Well, should have been a block punt. We had one thing that went wrong. It affected two other guys. And now we rough the punter and Clemson gets the first down instead of, at the very best for Clemson, it should have been a very quick kick because of the pressure that, they could have had a chance to return. Instead, you end up roughing the punter. At best, you could have gotten a block punt and then maybe you score on it. So that consistency is something that's clearly on his mind. So we'll, what does that mean? What changes do they implement? What kind of stamp does Smiley put on this thing? We'll see as we go.
Didn't Clemson get a field goal on that drive too?
I was trying to think about that and I couldn't remember.
I'm pretty.
But when you think about that swing of going back, the pain of going back and looking at the tape and seeing one thing that went wrong and saying, if this had gone correctly, we probably blocked that punt.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as your offense is struggling, that would have been huge in that game. That could have been a, 6-point swing to 10-point swing, like very, very critical play. And so, I'll push back against their special teams weren't very good last year. I think, the head man himself, Shane Beamer, thought they were really good in the first half, not so good in the second half, and was kind of frustrated by that. So yeah, consistency is what's, he called it the one-shot mentality. You got a chance to block a punt. You don't get second down, third down, fourth down. You got one opportunity to do it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, y'all. Hey, that's going to do it for today. Shout out, as always, Clark Brooks. It's been a while since we had him on, man. We need to do that more often. But I got to say, dude, we've only had one episode per week, I think, the last 3 weeks. But Clark Brooks, Charles Power, Darren Usher, I mean, those are as information-filled guests as you can possibly have. So I'm not saying that to brag on this show itself because that's not our way of doing things, but I will brag on those three guys, man, because they are as good as they come at throwing passion into what they do and having information to back up what they're saying as well. So, man, shout out to Darren, to Charles, and to Clark. Hope y'all enjoyed those interviews as much as we enjoyed bringing them to you, and hope you guys have a great weekend as well. Chris and I are going to get out of here and I guess go watch some ball, some softball, some baseball, and as always, we'll be on Gamecock Central and the Insiders Forum, bringing you anything you need to know about South Carolina football. So, all right, y'all have a great weekend, and